Today we dive into a story of resistance and repression, of a nation at a tipping point. We are going to Cameroon, a nation led by the world's oldest president, 91-year-old who has been in power for an astonishing 43 years, a nation scared by a brutal hidden civil war, a nation whose youth are rising up against a system of repression and neocolonialism that has kept them in chains for decades. With the pivotal election just months away, this is a make-or-break moment, a true tipping point that could either ignite a new dawn of freedom or plunge the country deeper into chaos. Well, Biya is running for president again. He's 92 years old, Africa's longest-serving leader. In power since 1982, that's 43 years at the top. While Biya clings to the presidency, millions of Cameroonians are rising up to say, enough is enough. When he first took office, the internet didn't exist. The Berlin Wall was still standing. And many of you watching this weren't even born. Now, the world is watching. Now, in 2025, he's pushing for another 7-year term. If he wins, and we know how elections go under regimes like this, he'll still be in office at age 98. That's nearly half a century in power. Imagine a nation where one man has ruled for 43 years. Imagine a hidden war on his watch that has claimed over 6,000 lives. And imagine half of that nation's money, its economic lifeline, locked away in the treasury of its former colonizer, France. This isn't fiction. It's Cameroon in 2025, as the world's oldest president clings to power. His country is sinking, held down by corruption, economic control, and conflict. But something is shifting. A new generation raised entirely under Biya's shadow is rising up and demanding change. In a few months, Cameroon faces a pivotal election. This takes a chance to finally break the circle. But instead of stepping aside, Biya's regime is doubling down, banning opposition coalitions, arresting activists for social media posts, and crushing peaceful protests with tear gas. The message is clear: dissent at your own peril. This is the kind of regime France still props up in Africa, a system built on silence, fear, and foreign control. But in this episode, we expose France's iron grip on Cameroon and the uprising that's now shaking its foundation. So how did Cameroon arrive at this point? How does a single leader preside over a nation for over 4 decades, becoming the world's oldest head of state? And the second longest-serving president after Equatorial Guinea's Theodore Obiang? Poor Biya, who took power in 1982, perfected the art of forever presidency. When concessional term limits stood in his way, he simply had them removed. When elections were held, they were almost invariably marred by allegations of white male fraud, intimidation, and irregularities. The 2018 election was a masterclass in this autocratic playbook. When Biya claimed a landslide 71% victory, his main opponent, the respected law professor Maurice Kamto, cried foul and declared himself the real winner based on his party's tallies. The result was not a recount or a legal review, but a wave of unrest met with iron fist. In January 2019, Kamto and over 200 of his supporters were arrested for daring to protest what they called a stolen election. They were charged with rebellion and insurrection, serious crimes that could carry the death penalty. A leading opposition figure thrown in jail simply for challenging an autocrat. Human Rights Watch noted that the crackdown sent a chilling message to anyone who would dare to question the status quo. Biya's rule has been a masterclass in control, built on foundations of fear. Patronage that rewards loyalty and punishing dissent, and the brute force of his security apparatus. His ruling party, the CPDN, dominates every corner of government, while the opposition is kept fragmented and suppressed. It is no coincidence that as we approach the 2025 election, authorities are once again shutting down opposition meetings and jailing activists before they can build any real momentum. Political oppression is not the only crisis felt under Biya's long rule. Since 2016, Cameroon has been consumed by a brutal and bloody conflict in its English-speaking regions, a hidden civil war that rarely makes international headlines. The Anglophone crisis began not with guns, but with grievances. It started with peaceful protests by teachers and lawyers from the northwest and southwest regions, who were marching against their systemic marginalization by the francophone-dominated central government. They were fighting for their language, their culture, and their legal systems. The region's response was not dialogue, but a violent crackdown. This state-sponsored violence poured fuel on the fire, transforming a peaceful rights movement into a full-blown armed separatist insurgency. In the years that followed, the fighting between separatist militias and government forces has been catastrophic. More than 6,000 people have been killed, letter numbers sinking, over 6,000 lives lost. Villages have been razed to the ground. Hundreds of thousands of children have been forced out of school, and civilians have been caught in a horrific crossfire of massacres, kidnappings, and unspeakable atrocities committed by both sides. While Biya's government labels the separatists as terrorists and unleashes the military, a profound humanitarian disaster has unfolded. Over 500,000 people have been internally displaced, forced to flee their homes, with many now living as refugees in neighboring country. Yet the Biya regime has remained in a state of denial, consistently refusing broad-based dialogue with moderate Anglophone leaders who could broker peace. For young Cameroonians, especially those in the Anglophone regions, this war is not a distant political issue. It is their friends and family being killed, their communities being destroyed, and their futures being erased. To truly understand Cameroon's struggles, we must zoom out and look at the invisible chains that have shackled its economy. Since its supposed independence in 1960, the clearest and most damning example is the CFR franc, colonial-era currency still used by Cameroon and 13 other African countries, whose architecture is a masterstroke of neocolonial control. Did you know that under the rules of this system, Cameroon is legally required to deposit 50% of its foreign currency reserves into French treasury in Paris? For every dollar or euro Cameroon earns from its oil, cocoa, or timber exports, half of it will be sent to sit in a French bank account. Controlled not by Cameroon, but by France. In exchange, France guarantees the currency's stability, a deal forged in the 1940s that has been described by critics as monetary servitude. This arrangement means Cameroon has no true monetary sovereignty. It cannot set its own policies to boost its economy. This dependency was laid bare in 1994 when France, without warning, devalued the CFR franc by 50% overnight. A decision made in Paris that instantly wiped out half the savings of millions of African families. Beyond the currency, France and Western corporations have long dominated Cameroon's economic sectors. In telecoms, the French giant Orange leads the market. In oil and gas, France's Total LHs have held major stakes for decades. The country's busiest port and its railway were for years run by the French conglomerate, extracting immense profits while national infrastructure crumbled. This is the legacy of Francafrique, the shadowy network of political and business ties that ensures French interests are protected. The tragic irony is that Cameroon is a nation blessed with oil, cobalt, iron, or timber and fertile land. Yet 40% of its people live below the poverty line, and youth underemployment is a staggering 65%. The world is there, but it flows overseas, not into schools and hospitals in Yaoundé or Bamenda. Faced with a geriatric dictatorship, a brutal war, and an exploited economy, Cameroon's younger generation has had to make a choice: succumb to despair or fight back. They are choosing to fight with courage, creativity, and the tools of the digital age. Speaking truth to power in a country where doing so can land you in prison. The story of Junior Ngambi, a 23-year-old TikToker, perfectly illustrates this new front. He posted a video urging democratic change and encouraging young people to register to vote for the 2025 election. In one clip that went viral, he declared, "In 2025, either we win or we lose everything." The regime's response was swift and brutal. Ngambi was abducted by plainclothes agents and charged with inciting rebellion and propagation of false news for his TikTok post. An international outcry erupted online with the hashtag #FreeJuniorNgambi. And after weeks of intense pressure from civil society, he was thankfully granted provisional freedom. His case sent a clear message. The regime is terrified of the youth's voice. Despite this intimidation, the digital resistance continues. Citizen journalists use their online platform to report on human rights abuses the state media ignores. Everyday citizens with a smartphone are documenting protests and sharing them with the world in an instant. This digital activism connects Cameroonian youth with their peers across the continent, from Nigeria to Sudan to Uganda, who are all facing the same kind of regimes with power of the internet and sheer determination. As opposition MPs stated, Cameroonian youth will no longer sit back and watch their futures crippled. Cameroon's fight is not happening in a vacuum. It is a critical front in a much broader African awakening, particularly across Francophone Africa, where a powerful wave of popular sentiment is rising up to reject the old neocolonial order. Look at the Sahel. In the last few years, mass uprisings in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, often led or heavily supported by youth, have successfully demanded the expulsion of French troops and overturned French-backed regimes. By January 2025, no fewer than 6 African nations have either removed French forces or moved to sever long-standing military ties with Paris. The world's unquestionable French presence in Africa is crumbling because ordinary people have had enough. The cries of France must go from the streets of Bamako and Ouagadougou, echo the deep frustration felt by young Africans in Cameroon. The CFA franc itself is under attack across the region, with many demanding its replacement with a truly African currency. This is a pan-African spiritual awakening, connecting the dots between Nigeria's Answers movement, anti-corruption marches in Kenya, and pro-democracy protests in Uganda. Cameroon is a geopolitical centerpiece in this story. Stability or instability will ripple across Central Africa. If Cameroon is successfully pushed back against French influence, it could ignite a francophone spring in neighboring Equatorial Guinea, led by yet another aging autocrat. The dream of Pan-African visionaries like Kwame Nkrumah and Patrice Lumumba of an Africa free to determine its own destiny is being revived by a new generation. They see the expulsion of foreign troops in the Sahel not as isolated events, but as battles won in a continental war for true liberation. So here we stand at the historic crossroad. The brave youth of Cameroon are on the front lines, pushing for a future free from tyranny and foreign exploitation. The question now is, what will you do about it? First, we must break the silence. The crisis in Cameroon receives shamefully little international media attention. Share this story. Talk about it. Use the hashtags. Tag news outlets and influencers. Do not let 6,000 deaths in the Anglophone crisis go unnoticed. Do not let a 43-year-old dictatorship quietly stage another fraudulent election. Second, stand in solidarity. If you're African, recognize that Cameroon's fight for economic and political sovereignty is your fight too. If you are in the diaspora or an ally abroad, use your voice. Write to your elected representative and foreign ministers. Ask them why your government continues to provide aid and diplomatic cover to a regime that jails its opponents and wages war on its own people. International pressure works. It was instrumental in securing Moses Campton's release in 2019. Let's demand that aid be tied to human rights and a genuine democratic progress. Third, support the brave organizations and journalists on the ground who risk their freedom to document abuses and assist victims. And finally, engage with this community. Share your thoughts right there in the comments section. To the youths of Cameroon listening to this, you are not alone. Your courage is an inspiration, and the world is beginning to listen. The Cameroonian people have been patient for 43 years. They have endured the fire of war and the suffocation of poverty, yet they still stand defiant and hopeful. The front line of this struggle is not just in our Bamenda, it is everywhere. It is in every conversation we have, every post we share, and every demand we make for justice. And don't forget, like the video and subscribe the channel to keep thinking the world how it really is.